More scary stories to tell in the dark. Collected folklore retold by Alvin Schwartz. Illustrated by Stephen Gamel. A weird blue light. Late one night in October 1864, a Confederate blockade runner slipped by some Union gunboats at the entrance to Galveston Bay in Texas and made it safely to port with its cargo of food and other necessities. Louis Billings, the master of the small vessel, was getting ready to weigh anchor when he was startled by a shriek from one of the crew. A strange, old-fashioned schooner with a big black flag was rushing down at us, Billings said later. She was afire with some sort of weird, pale blue light that lighted up every nook and cranny of her. The crew was pulling at the ropes and doing other work, and they paid us no attention, didn't even glance our way. They all had ghastly bleeding wounds, but their faces and eyes were those of dead men. The man who had shrieked had fallen to his knees, his teeth chattering as he gasped out for prayer. Overcoming my own terror, that was chilling the very marrow of my bones. I rushed forward, shouting to the others as I ran. Suddenly, the schooner vanished before my eyes. Some say that it was the ghost of John Lafayette's pirate ship, Pride, that sank off Galveston Island in 1821 or 1822. She was seen again in 1892 in the same waters with the same crew. Somebody fell from Aloft. I had signed on as an ordinary seaman on the Falls of Ettrick, a merchant ship bound for England. The first time I saw that ship, I knew her right away. She was the old Gertrude Spurshoe. I had sailed on her years before, when she was painted brown and gold. Now, she was painted black and had a new name. But it was the same ship for sure. We had a pretty good crew for the voyage, except for one hard-looking ticket named McLaren. He was a pretty good seaman, but there was something about him that I didn't trust. He was kind of secretive, kept mostly to himself. One day, somebody told him that I had work on the old Gertrude. For some weird reason, he got all tremble over that. Then, I catched him giving me all of these ugly black looks, as if he was itching to knife me in the back. I guess it had something to do with the Gertrude, but I didn't know what. Well, this one day, we was trying to work our way through a dripping black fog. You'd scarcely know we had all the lights on. And it was dead calm. There wasn't a breath of fresh air. The ship just lay there, wallowing in a throe, a rollin' and rollin', going nowheres. I was standing my watch around midships, and McLaren was doing his trick at the wheel. The rest of the crew was scattered around one place and another. It was as quiet as could be. Then all at once, wacko! This thing hits the deck right in front of McLaren. He lets go of a screech that turns my blood cold, and he falls down in a faint. The second mate starts yelling that somebody had fallen from aloft. Laying out there just forward of the wheel was someone, or something, dressed in oilskins with blood oozing out from underneath. The captain ran and fetched a big light from his cabin so we could see who it was. They kind of straightened him out to get a good look at his face. He was a big, ugly-looking devil, but nobody knew who he was or what he was doing up there. At least, nobody was saying. When McLaren came to from his faint, they tried to get something out of him. All he did was jabber away, and he kept rolling those big, wild-looking eyes of his. Everybody was getting more excited. We all wanted to heave the body overboard as quick as we could. There was something weird about it, as if it wasn't real. But the captain wasn't so sure about getting rid of it that way. Could it be a stowaway, he asked. But the ship was so filled with lumber we were carrying that there was no space where a living thing could hide for 3 weeks, which is how long we had been out. Even if it was a stowaway, what was it doing aloft on such a dirty day? There was no reason for anyone to be up there. There was nothing to see. Finally, the captain gave up and told us to heave him overboard. Then, nobody would touch him. The mate ordered us to pick him up, but nobody made a move. Then he tried coaxing, but that didn't do any good. Suddenly, that loony McLaren started yelling. I handled him once, and I can handle him again. He picks up the body and staggers over to the railing. He is just about to throw it overboard when it wraps its 2 big long arms around him, and over they go together. Then on the way down, one of them starts laughing in a horrible way. The mates are yelling to launch a boat, but nobody would get into a boat, not on a night like that. We threw a couple of life preservers after them, but everybody knew they weren't any help. So, that was that. Or was it? The first chance I had to go home after that, I went right over to see old Captain Spurshoe, who was the captain when the Gertrude was around. Well, he says, one trip, these 2 outlandish men shipped aboard the Gertrude. One was McLaren, the other was a really big fella. The big one was always picking on McLaren and thumping him around, and McLaren was always talking about how he would get back at him. Well, this wet, dirty night, the 2 of them was up there alone, and the big one come flying down, killed himself, deader in a hurry. McLaren says the foot rope they were using parted and how he almost fell himself. But everybody who saw that rope knew she didn't give away on her own. She had been cut through with a knife. After that, whenever we came into port, McLaren thought we were going to get the police after him, and he'd get pretty scared. But we couldn't prove anything, so we didn't try. In the end, I guess the big fella took care of things his own way. If he was a ghost that came back, that's what he was. If there be things like ghosts. The Little Black Dog. Billy Mansfield said that a little black dog followed him wherever he went, but he was the only one who saw it, so people thought he was kind of crazy. To drive the dog away, Billy was always hollering at it, throwing rocks at it, but the dog always came back. The first time Billy saw that dog was the day he fought Silas Burden. Billy was just a young man then, but the Burdens and Billy's family had been feuding for years. When Billy saw Silas riding toward him, he went for his gun, and Burden went for his. But Billy fired first. He hit Burden in the back, knocking him from his horse. Burden's horse ran off, and his gun fell where he couldn't reach it. He laid there on the ground, pleading to Billy not to kill him. But Billy showed no remorse, and killed him anyway. Burden's little black dog was with him when he was shot. The dog kept licking Burden's face, and was barking and snarling at Billy. In his anger, Billy killed the dog too. There wasn't much law enforcement in those days, so Billy wasn't arrested. But all that night, he heard Burden's dog outside his cabin, scratching on his door and barking to be let in. I'm imagining this, Billy said to himself. I shot that dog. It's dead. But the next morning, Billy saw the dog. It was waiting for him outside. From then on, there was not a day when he didn't see it, and there wasn't a night when he didn't hear it scratching on his door, barking to be let in. From then on, Billy was always finding the black dog on his sofa, on the floor, in his bed, and even in his food. And the house and the yard stank of the dog. That's what Billy said. Whenever somebody told him there wasn't any dog to see, he'd say, "Maybe you don't see it, but I do. And I'm not any crazier than you are." Things went on like this for many years. Then, one morning, in the middle of winter, the neighbors didn't see any smoke coming from Billy's chimney. When they went over to check, Billy wasn't there. A day or so later, they found his body lying in the snow in a field back of his cabin. Billy had plenty of enemies, and at first, it seemed like somebody might have killed him, but there wasn't a mark on his body, and there weren't any footprints around there, except for Billy's. The doctor said Billy probably died of old age, but there was something odd about his death. When the neighbors found Billy, there were black dog hairs on his clothes. There were even a few on his face. It smelled like a dog had been out there. Yet no one had seen a dog anywhere. Clinkety clink. An old lady got sick and died. She had no family and no close friends. So the neighbors got a gravedigger to dig a grave for her, and they had a coffin made, and they placed it in her living room. As was the tradition, they washed her body and dressed her up in her best clothes and put her in the coffin. When she died, her eyes were wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. The neighbors found 2 old silver dollars on her dresser, and they put them on her eyelids to keep them closed. They lit candles and sat up with her so that she would not be lonely on that first night that she was dead. The next morning, a preacher came and said a prayer for her. Then everybody went home. Later, the gravedigger arrived to take her to the cemetery and bury her. He stared at the silver dollars on her eyes, and he picked them up. How shiny and smooth they were. How thick and heavy. They're beautiful, he thought. Just beautiful. He looked at the dead woman with her eyes wide open. He felt she was staring at him, watching him hold her coins. It gave him a creepy feeling. He put the coins back on those eyes of hers to keep them closed. But before he knew it, his hands reached out again and grabbed the coins and stuck them in his pocket. Then he grabbed a hammer and quickly nailed shut the lids on the coffin. "Now you can't see anything," he said to her. Then he took her out to the cemetery and he buried her as fast as he could. When the gravedigger got home, he put the 2 silver dollars in a tin box and shook it. The coins made a cheerful rattling sound, but the gravedigger wasn't feeling cheerful. He couldn't forget those eyes looking at him. When it got dark, a storm came up, and the wind started blowing. It blew all around the house. It came in through the cracks and around the windows, and down the chimney. The fire flared and flickered. The gravedigger threw some fresh wood on the fire, got into bed, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. The wind kept blowing. The fire flared and flickered and cast evil-looking shadows on the walls. The gravedigger lay there, thinking about the dead woman's eyes staring at him. The wind blew stronger and louder, and the fire flared and flickered and popped and snapped, and he got more and more scared. Suddenly, he heard another sound. Clinkety clink, clinkety clink, it went. Clinkety clink, clinkety clink. It was the silver dollars rattling in the tin box. "Hey!" the gravedigger shouted. "Who's taking my money?" But all he heard was the wind blowing, and the flames flaring, and flickering, and snapping and popping, and the coins going clinkety clink, clinkety clink. He leapt out of bed and chained up the door. Then he hurried back, but his head had barely touched the pillow when he heard clinkety clink, clinkety clink. Then he heard something way off in the distance. It was a voice crying, "Where is my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared, and flickered, and snapped and popped, and the money went clinkety clink, clinkety clink. The gravedigger was really scared at this point. He got out of bed again, and piled up all the furniture against the door, and he put a heavy iron skillet over the tin box. Then he jumped back into bed and covered his head with the blankets. But the money rattled louder, and way off a voice cried, "Give me my money. Who's got my money?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared, and flickered, and snapped, and popped, and the gravedigger shivered, and shook and cried, "Oh lordy, lordy." Suddenly, the front door flew open, and in walked the ghost of the dead woman, with her eyes wide open, staring at everything, and yet seeing nothing. And the wind blew, and the money went clinkety clink, clinkety clink. And the fire flared, flickered, and snapped, and popped, and the ghost of the dead woman cried, "Where is my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the gravedigger moaned, "Oh lordy lord." The ghost could hear her money going clinkety clink, clinkety clink in the tin box. But her dead eyes couldn't see the box, so she reached out with her arms and tried to find it. The wind went, and the money rattled clinkety clink, clinkety clink, and the fire flared, flickered, snapped, and popped, and the gravedigger shivered and shook and moaned, "Oh lordy lord." And the woman cried, "Give me my money. Who's got my money? Who? Who?" He approached the gravedigger. "You've got it."